Hey everybody, it's Norm from Tested.
And it's Jeremy from Tested.
Welcome to Projections, our show about virtual reality and augmented reality and its many applications. This week we're going to be talking about a new game that's out and it's been in development for quite a while.
Yep, it's Brass Tactics. It's from the guys who brought us Defense Grid 2, if you remember that one. That was a gamepad VR game.
Hidden Path Entertainment, and they've had a relationship with Oculus. Defense Grid 2 was part of that initial launch, and this game is part of an Oculus Studios games, which means Facebook funded it, so we'll get that right out of the way. It is exclusive to the Oculus platform, at least for now. But it's one of the few real-time strategy games, or strategy games in general, for virtual reality.
Yeah, and a lot of people are calling it the first real AAA RTS game for VR. And it does look great. I mean, just from the outset, the graphics are quite good. And I think they made a lot of choices that are appropriate for VR, with a lot of flat colors, you know, a lot of nice geometry, but not too complicated so that you can make things out that are in the distance. And it just feels very, very immersing. As
opposed to incredibly high polygon worlds or characters, it's all about the animations. So let's lay it out. For real-time strategy games, if you've played a real-time strategy game or a strategy game on your flat screen, you typically have a map, a large map, and in this case, the map is a game board. It's a world that lives on the surface in front of you.
It's a game board the size of a living room.
Oh yeah.
It's quite big. In fact, there are many maps. In the game, there are a total of, I think, 21 maps total. There's 6 competitive one-on-one. There's 6 co-op maps. So there's a lot to see, but every map is a slightly different size. So some of them are a little bit smaller, think like pool table size. Some are quite large, like a swimming pool almost.
And in virtual reality, we often talk about locomotion or moving around, and in real-time strategy games, there is moving around, because when you're playing a traditional StarCraft or even a MOBA, you're clicking around a map. Here, there is no clicking. What you're doing is you're moving the map by hulking.
Are you moving the map, or are you moving yourself?
Oh, it's all relative.
Like, you might think when you're designing the game, maybe we'll just draw boxes around the characters. Maybe you have a God's eye view and you're doing, you're basically like redoing what you're doing with a mouse. This is not that at all.
No.
This is you use one of the triggers on your controller to grab the world and fling it past you. And then it has this great sense of momentum, where if you let go, you actually continue to fly through the space until you basically slow down and stop.
So you, as a character, as the controller player in the game, have no real body presence. Even though you have an avatar, you have your hands, you have your head, you actually see the hands and head of whether a player you're playing with or the AI opponent, but the world just kind of moves through underneath you, and that movement is completely lateral only. Left, right, forward, backward.
Right. Interestingly, there's no way to rotate in this game. There's no way for me as the player to change directions. I have to physically do that. And I say that's interesting because Oculus is a 2-camera setup by default, and they are a forward-facing, approach to VR typically. So I'm surprised they didn't include that option.
In a way that you could have either using a thumbstick to move left and right, and that could have snap rotated you or smooth rotation, or to hulk and grab the world and move the world around you. And some games have let you move through the world and rotate and reposition yourself. Here, you actually have to turn your body around or realign and reset your orientation.
Yeah. So, the other side of the coin is you never get disoriented. You always know which way your unit should be going, and you're always facing your opponent's castle the other side of the board.
The other thing you can do is move the game world up and down.
Yeah.
And so that gets you closer to the battlefield, which is a way to make the battlefield feel bigger, but it's not the same as growing and shrinking the world, scaling the world.
Can't do that.
That was an interesting decision for them to make.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's something you would zoom in, zoom out with typical RTS games. There's none of that here. So everything kind of retains its scale, and it's actually a lot of fun to get closer yourself. Like, you would zoom in by getting closer, putting your head down closer to the board, and you can play it sitting or standing, which I found nice. If you want to play sitting, start sitting, and then you can grab the world to raise and lower it.
Now, the actual RTS mechanics mechanics. Whether you're playing 2v1 or 1v1, you have a castle, the enemy has a castle, and the world is divided into these regions that you have to capture. Each region has 1 or 2 of these capturable points that you can lay down towers in. So you have 2 resources. There's ore, there's this diamond resource, and ores for units, diamonds typically for these structures, and then you're laying down tiers of structures, whether you're building a structure that can generate infantry, or a structure that can generate cavalry, or archers. But you also have your castle, and as you upgrade your castle by spending more resources, your castle levels up.
Right, so you only have a few spots in your castle that you can use to upgrade. And so you have to make choices. It's basically a tech tree, and you're deciding, what do I want to put my money into fast enough so that I can upgrade the units that will defeat my opponent. Maybe you can run over there and see what your opponent's working on, run back and upgrade the appropriate unit, because there is a rock, paper, scissors element to this, as there is in all RTS games. The infantry, the cavalry, and the archers, they have this relationship.
And while it's not necessarily as deep as a game like Age of Empires or even StarCraft in terms of the tech tree and the number of buildings you can create, the macro game, which I'm talking about, the resource management, the tech tree, I think is sophisticated enough to give you options for how you're going to decide to expand your empire and play out a 40-minute game.
Yeah. I mentioned you could run over to your enemy and see what they're doing right away. There is no fog of war in this game. You can see where all the enemy units are marching. You can see what your opponent's up to, where your opponent is, and so where they are working on the game board itself, because that's important. That's an important detail. It takes time to go from one area to another, and you can see where they're putting all of their attention. Now, how do you feel about that? That there's no fog of war?
I thought it was really interesting. I never found myself really doing that. I found that I was so focused. I like to play really efficiently in the macro game and really try to manage all my resources and spend as soon as I get, know exactly when I'm going to spend the next 8 diamonds to build a tower, or when I'm going to do my upgrade.
Yeah.
I feel like going over to the opponents and looking at what they're doing is a waste of time. So I'm just keeping an eye on it, which is really interesting. In VR, I can lift my head up and just glance. Oh no, they've built a tower over there. Maybe I should reposition and put another tower over here.
It is much more like having a real live game board, or living room size game that's playing out in front of you that way.
And that's the real benefit of VR for this game, where you're not looking at a mini map. There is no shortcut to jump across the map. Everything is laid out before you, and it's really your attention to detail and what you can see in the distance, literally in the distance, enemies coming across for you to time out where to position your characters.
And in addition to no mini-map, as you would hope from a VR game, there's no HUD whatsoever. All of the controls are basically made onto your body. Now, it takes the Oculus avatar that you've designed, and it grafts onto that a controller that's on top of your hand, where you can you can see where the controls are, what you can do. But if you rotate your hand like this, it augments this huge palette essentially of units and towers essentially that you can grab and put down wherever you want.
Now there's also a micro game, as every RTS has, which is the minute controls of your characters, of their pathfinding, of their positioning for combat and for exploration. And here's where I felt like the game felt short a little bit. There is, like you said, a rock, paper, scissors mechanic for combat, and there's actually really good customization. You design your palette of characters. There are more characters than you can deploy in the game world. You choose whether you want a more defensive-oriented deck of characters or a more offensive one.
And they give you preset decks that you can play with, or you can just make your own.
But when we're talking about actually on the battlefield, this is where I feel like the micro control of a keyboard and mouse is more precise than what they offer, at least in the VR interaction. Like dragging a unit and positioning it, it wasn't as fine a control as I wanted. I wanted to be able to position my archer in this direction and really do like a Total War style of combat management. And I didn't get that. It was more just clustering units and just sending them off in one direction.
I totally get what you're saying. I think, sort of like FPS, I'm not convinced VR is the best platform for this genre, for RTS in general. I mean, because like you said, if you were to play this game against someone using mouse and keyboard, they'd be so much faster at moving around the map, at selecting units, and giving them commands, even if they were limited to what you could do with this game. I still think it would be a faster, more efficient interface to use mouse and keyboard. That said, I would prefer to play it in VR because it's so much more immersing. It's infinitely more immersing. And the graphics just feel so much more alive. And I can get right down inside those battles, and I can, you know, select my units and throw them over there. It's a different experience.
RTS, as I've traditionally played it on desktop, is a fast pace, is where milliseconds count.
Yeah.
And that's why keyboard shortcuts, very accurate, you know, high DPI mice come to play and give competitors a little bit of an advantage. In VR, those not having the abstractions of a keyboard shortcut to, say, group units together and requiring that you use gestural, more intuitive movements, which is great. The learning curve is much more gradual for VR RTS. It necessitates a slower pace of play. And I don't think they designed the game to really suit the slower pace of play.
Oh, really?
I wish it was even slower.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, well, I wish it was slower because I suck at RTS games. So I could use as much time as you could possibly give me.
You want to be able to position your characters and have the combat actually mean something. Have all those small decisions, the gestures and the positioning of characters, have traversing the world, hulking through the world actually mean something.
But there's nothing in this game that moves that fast. Like, there aren't units that tear through the world and ram after you super fast. I mean, there's the cavalry, and when they get close enough, they can do this sort of dash move into you. But I feel like they did do a good job of that pace, of controlling that pace and slowing it down.
At least they aim to.
There are a couple things that you can do, which is more finite control than just grouping your units. By default, you grab the trigger and you swipe over all your guys. You'll select everybody, and you'll send them wherever you want to send them.
Just by hovering over them.
Right, but if you want to just select one of those groups of units that are inside a pile of them, you pull halfway, and that will just get that guy. You won't select anyone else, and then you can send them over there. With the stick, you can command them to attack at will as they're traveling, or just to go straight there without attacking. You can have them stand their ground. But that's about it in terms of the finite control that you have.
Which is a really interesting implementation of selecting units, as opposed to dragging a rectangle
like a marquee,
around units. You're literally hovering over in three-dimensional space where the units are. And I think that's another interesting thing, is that the world and this game, ostensibly it's a 2D battlefield, but there are 3 dimensions. You have units that are flying, you have units that are on the ground, and you are in a 3-dimensional space because as you're moving up and down through the world. So I think RTS may be better suited for something like Homeworld, where it is all 6 degrees of movement, 3 degrees of flying around, rather than 2D Battlefield. Because I often found myself wanting to click the dragons and attack the wasp, but I would misclick because it was off alignment in that 3D space because it wasn't just on a 2D field.
I would never turn down the opportunity to play Homeworld on any platform, one of my favorite RTS games of all time. One other thing that we should mention is there are co-op maps, so you can play with a buddy against 2 other people, and you see them. You see your friend over there, and interestingly, you can't control their units.
Yeah.
So if you see, and they're different colors, so you can tell who's who, but you basically can build different tech trees, and you collaborate that way in order to basically outwit your opponent. And
some of the AI does get difficult, even in the single-player campaign. We were playing mostly on the normal difficulty, and the games last good 20 minutes to 40 minutes, depending on how slow. I like playing it slow because I want to get to the high-level units, these Titan units or the airship units, and really just show just have an overwhelming force. I don't know if this game will have legs.
You don't think that it has a depth?
I don't know if it will stand replayability, in the months to come. I know Oculus is launching tournaments for brass tactics and getting people to play competitively, but I don't know if it has the depth of a StarCraft or a MOBA. It feels still a little bit simplistic, and I think that's a decision they made because they wanted to make this game accessible. Well,
chess is simplistic. I wouldn't be surprised if this does have legs, just because it has the high production value that you want to keep coming back to. And as someone who's not great at RTS games, it onboards you fairly well. So I feel comfortable in this game. And especially playing co-op with a buddy, maybe somebody who's more experienced like yourself, I wouldn't be surprised to see this game take off. Unfortunately, it does have a high price point. It's a $40 game.
Yep.
However, there is a free version of it that's called Brass Tactics Arena, which gives you 1 map for competitive, 1 map for co-op, And
2 of the single-player campaign games.
Right, and you can play with people who have brass tactics as long as you play one of those maps that you get for free in Arena.
So absolutely, I think if you have a Rift, the Arena is a no-brainer. Download it, try it out. Whether you're into RTS games or not, you're not huge in RTS games, and you found this very enjoyable.
Yeah.
So I think it is a really interesting use case for VR, and I think it proves the point that RTS as a genre can have legs in VR. I don't think they've quite hit it yet, but I would love to see the next step, what it means for them to think about more RTS concepts in the virtual reality.
Yeah, me too. Props for the artistic design on this game too. I love this mech, steampunkish but clean look that they came up with.
The next game we want to talk about is actually an older game that was just put out as a final release. It was previously in early access. It's on both the Oculus Store and on Steam. It's ping pong, 11 table tennis.
You never tell, not someone who takes it seriously, you'd never call it ping pong. It's table tennis. And when we first played DK1, and I remember this day, and I brought it to the old tested office, and we were talking about it at lunch or after work, and I said, so what game would you want to make in VR? And we were coming up with ideas, and my first idea was table tennis, because that's what I want to do. I want to play table tennis all the time in VR. Great, let's do it. You said, well, that must be in development already. It's such an obvious, great idea. There must be multiple people making these things. Well, there are, it turns out. There were multiple people making these things. There are now multiple table tennis options. I think this is the best one.
And you have some tennis background, some table tennis background also.
Oh, sure.
You played a lot of table tennis.
I mean, I played my share of table tennis. In high school, I went to a state tournament. I made it 1 round in. I'm not great, but I love table tennis.
But so from your perspective, does the abstraction of having this controller or a Vive controller mock the way you hold a table tennis paddle? Does that work?
It's like learning, it's almost like a different game. I mean, to be honest with you. I mean, you get the table tennis rule set from the beginning, so you know what you're supposed to be doing. But the physics of it, while they feel very good, and they did a great job of emulating reality as much as possible.
For the layman, I'd tell you, it's indistinguishable from playing real
come on,
table
what are you talking
tennis.
about for the layman? I mean,
for me, like a casual table tennis player, it feels so good.
Well, it depends. Like if you're used to playing with paddles that don't have soft rubber on them, or if you... if you're used to playing like cardboard, or not cardboard, but hardwood paddles with sandpaper or something like that, it's going to feel completely different. But the spin is fantastic. So once you really get a feel for the angles and how hard you hit them, the spin factor is really what's impressive. Because I'm not even sure what engine they're doing this in. I'm assuming it's Unity. But this is not something that Unity does by itself. So they really did a great job programming those physics into it, where you can do this backspin, topspin, side spin, and really cause the ball to curve.
And one of the cool things is that because everyone holds their table tennis paddles differently, and because there are multiple different controller schemes, whether you're using the Rift or the Vive, you can realign how the game model of the paddle orients with how you hold this controller.
Yeah, if you go into the menus, you have an option to pull the trigger, and then your paddle stays static, and you move your controller within it, and then you let go, and that's your new angle. Now, I'm still struggling to find that perfect angle, because there's something about this controller that you're locked in a position. With a normal ping pong paddle, you'll be shifting a lot. I almost feel like the Vive might be a better platform for this, just
even
for the
though
controller.
It's a wider grip.
You can change your grip a little bit better.
You can even toss it up in the air and do some fancy moves. What about the weight distribution?
Right.
They don't weigh the same, and the center of gravity isn't necessarily the same.
Actually, these guys just recently added support for the Vive tracker, so you could potentially make your own ping pong paddle that has the tracker on it. Now the weight's going to be weird. I mean, you have to find a way to make that work, but that would be interesting to get a real ping pong paddle controller, put it in there. It's a very basic game. You jump into this game and you're at a ping pong table with a guy, an AI opponent on the other side. And I gotta say, the AI is really good. It anticipates where you're going to be. It's very fluid. It has, it emotes these.
AI cheats. It knows the physics model. It knows where the ball's gonna be every time.
It absolutely cheats, and you can tell. But it's good, and it has these difficulty levels where even the basic difficulty is challenging, and as a casual game of ping pong can be if you're out of practice. So you play on that one, and then you graduate. But eventually, you're going to be backing up from that table, and it's very difficult. The AI is exceptionally good. And there are also these practice modes. You go in there, and you can try to hit the squares, hit the targets. and just return automatic serves.
Two more things I want to mention. One, the table itself is, of course, a virtual table, but I found myself not wanting to pass the virtual table.
Oh my gosh.
And go clip into it.
Yeah.
So the psychology still totally works, and it's really weird when I do clip into the virtual table. My brain's like, I'm not supposed to be there.
It's not just that. This is one of those games like Echo Arena where you need to clear your space out.
And that's the other thing. You need to use these straps because you're going to be moving like aggressively.
Oh yeah, yeah, and
it can be a workout.
Yeah, you can go online and play against random people. For whatever reason, I usually play against people from Eastern Europe, and I'm laughing with the guy because I'm hitting my desk constantly, and he's winning these points.
You know, both the games we talk about, Brass Tactics and 11 Table Tennis, are both games that could be fun to spectate as well. Your games in 11 Table Tennis are recorded, and you can do replays, but that could be fun to stream if you're a Twitch streamer. And Brass Tactics has built-in camera modes so that if you have it mirrored to your desktop and you're capturing that for streaming, you can change those angles. So
that is true for Brass Tactics. Did you mean that? For 11?
For Brass Tactics, exactly. So like we're also seeing VR being catered to to this asymmetrical experience where. Not everyone has a VR headset, but you can enjoy what other people are doing in VR with these camera tools and with these replay tools. And I think both of these games are fun to watch because there's a lot going on.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the social aspect or see VR transport from outside of VR. Everyone's trying to figure that out too.
Mm-hmm. So those are recommendations for this week. Brass Tactics and 11 Table Tennis. We'll be back next week with more game reviews and more talk about VR and AR. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.